I want to say welcome, Guild members and docents. I guess we're officially here now again. If you're a new member or guest, please raise your hand. We want to see. Thank you very much for coming. We're happy to share this lecture from Dr. Bradley Bailey. As always, we see that you're more than welcome to join the Guild. We'd love you to join the Guild. We've just added a Jasper Johns lecture on December the 9th at 10:30. No reception since our holiday brunch is the next following day. We're sparing you those holiday calories. We are also, Alexandria and Megan, they're working, Alexandria especially, is working on the Moneta Picasso lecture. We're going to squeeze that one in also. There's Jerry. Thank you for coming. Well, your name is mentioned a few times, and you have some buddies here, so they go, where's Jerry? Where's Jerry? So this is what happens when you're a regular. We'll know everyone's name by then. Thanks to all who shared their kitchen skills, and for those who know where to shop for delicious food this morning. We still have room on the Schulenburg Painted Church Tour. We're actually going to 4 churches on October 21, leaving from Bayou Bend at 8:45, I believe. Our extended trip, thanks to Linda Dillahunty and Irina Witt, they've already gone and planned it all. March 17th to the 21st, we're filling up at an alarming rate. Our max capacity is at 35, and we're at 21 right now. For our trip, inclusive price, double occupancy is only $1,600, and double is only $1,900. So Jerry has worked very hard to make everything inclusive. We have 2 more fun volunteer opportunities this weekend, Bayou City Arts Festival and Latin X, and the weather is promising to be great. There's also a Turkish Film Festival you can volunteer for, and if you have any legal background, the museum's legal counsel office is needing some assistance, and that would be see Alexandria for that. And you can always go to my volunteer page for opportunities. So why we are here today? We are here because Dr. Bradley Bailey earned his bachelor's, master's, and PhD in art history, as well as his MBA, with an emphasis on the nonprofit management and museums from Yale University. His publications include essays in the exhibition catalog for Flash of Light, Fog of War, Prints of the Japanese Military, 1894 to 1905, along with essays on the works of the, I didn't ask you this, Bradley, Hokusai? How do you say that? Oh, H-O-K? Okusai, and on the prints from the Sino-Japanese War, Sino-Japanese War of 1898. When Dr. Bailey joined, he shared this: I'm excited to build on the Museum of Fine Art Houston's collection of Asian art, which is a daring blend of works with great historical importance and thrilling contemporary acquisitions. This combination provides an unparalleled opportunity to showcase traditional art forms alongside works from the present day, demonstrating their power and relevance to modern audiences. We're modern today, aren't we, ladies and gentlemen? He says, I look forward to tapping into the enthusiasm for and support of the museum and its patrons for its collection, and our guild and our docents. Please welcome Dr. Bradley Bailey, the Sing Tao and Wei Feng Chow Curator of Asian Art.
Thank you so much to Susan for that lovely introduction. I feel that's such a nice introduction, and then I show up. Sorry, but I'm very excited to share this with you. And as mentioned, we are building on the collection. I'm not going to deal with the entirety of the Asian collection today because that's vast. It's a huge, continent through all of time, which would be a lot to cover. But we are in a very interesting and fortunate position in that our samurai rotation, we call them rotations and not exhibitions, but it's essentially a small exhibition, has been extended and will be up for throughout 2020. So it's I think it's a wonderful way to introduce people into Asia, and will help you introduce, I have examples of how to integrate some of the objects from across Asia and from the other galleries. But it's I think it's a real crowd pleaser, and it's a really rich topic, and one that's very, very approachable. And unlike most of most of the Japanese rotations that we will be doing, and Chinese rotations as well, this will remain up for more than 6 months. As many of you know, the works on paper and textile and pretty much everything in Asia except for ceramics require us to rotate. So I understand that it is very difficult sometimes to learn an entirely new art history, and especially complicated Japanese names and foreign religious concepts and histories, and then to have it vanish on you after 4 months. So this samurai provides us a new opportunity really to delve deep into the Asian collection. So when you enter the gallery, one of the first things you will see is this suit of armor, which is directly opposite the door. I try to use a lot of photos from the gallery so that it will kind of simulate the experience of looking. And samurai armor is an incredibly complicated thing. It's made of many, many different types of materials: lacquer, deer leather, iron, lots of different furs. This is bear fur. Bear fur is one of the kind of common ones you see, especially in southern Japan. As I said, metal. There's more bear fur up here on the mustache. And then, of course, this large thing at the top, which we call a mayadate, which is basically just a helmet ornament. Now, you'll get lots of questions, especially when you look at the label, and the label will read that this is a modern day, a Tosei Gusoko, a modern day samurai armor. What does that mean? Well, I'll explain in a minute. It does not mean that it was made yesterday. It is definitely from the late 18th century, from the Edo period. But samurai are, I'll explain in a minute why it's called modern. In Japan, the 18th century is, believe it or not, quite modern compared to the 12th century. And samurai have a very, very long history in Japan. They are, in fact, a caste, a Japanese caste. And we think of Japan as a unified nation now, but of course it is a very long archipelago of many, many different historical fiefdoms, historically warring fiefdoms that up until the very, very late 16th century were not united all as one. With the union of Japan and samurai becoming kind of a really truly codified and regimented part of the ruling class, because of course we do have the emperor. Japan has the longest unbroken monarchy in the entire world. However, the emperor was not always in charge. During the Edo period, yes, the shogun, warlords were in charge, and ultimately the daimyo. We call it the Tokugawa period because the Tokugawa warlords ruled. And over the course of 300 years, with some strategic intermarriage with various aristocrats and also between clans, we do have members of the royal family that are descended from Tokugawa stock, as it were. But in focusing on this armor, this is actually relates very strongly to Japanese religion and almost kind of shamanistic or local beliefs. These helmet ornaments can tell you a lot about the individual, perhaps, who wore this armor. And you find a lot of these tied ropes and folded papers in Japanese Buddhism and in Japanese Shinto as ways to kind of ward off spirits, the various angles or tangles of the. If you go to a very fine Japanese restaurant, they will never fold the napkin perfectly flat. It'll always be askew, and this is a Shinto thing. It helps the angles and tangles of the rope confuse evil spirits. So that's great for battle. This is called a modern suit because it would have actually, it could have, let's say, been worn in battle. And it's actually easier to wear it when you see this. What's beneath it, and this is kind of exciting, is this incredibly complicated apparatus that we had to engineer to get the thing together because we don't have attendants dressing us as samurai did. Also, most of you probably would not fit the samurai armor before the advent of, widespread access to dairy products in Japan. People were very, very small. So that might be a question you get, why are they so small? It's because they didn't have calcium or as much calcium. But returning to the importance of Japan and the helmet ornament. Of course, we refer, in a highly regimented caste system, you need a master. And when you're fighting in battle, knowing that your master or the shogun lives on while you fight is very, very important. So in addition to serving a symbolic value, especially earlier suits, if you go to the Met and you see a much earlier helmet, will have huge mayadate. This is because you need to see them above the gunpowder, right? There's gunpowder going on the battlefield, which they get from China. And in order to see that your master is still alive, you need these very, very tall helmet ornaments that he rises above the gunpowder. They get it's kind of technical, but ultimately they get a different type of gunpowder, white gunpowder, which is easier to see through, and that's part of the reason the helmet ornaments shrink down over time. But in terms of gunpowder, it's wonderful to relate it to the Saigo Chong installation in the Chinese gallery, which itself contains different types of gunpowder. And it's also, I love this photo because this is, I think one of you, in fact, yes, one of you, docent, giving a tour, and this is exactly what we intended this rootwood stool to be used for, to be a jumping off point for children to describe it, and their descriptions were really, really wacky, that it was magical Harry Potter stool. That's not what I expected. I thought they'd say it looks like wood, but that's, so you never know what they're going to ask, but I think samurai armor has so many details that even from afar, as on the battlefield, it would have been very impressive, but up close. So it's actually kind of fun if you want to enter the gallery the other way to discuss the notion of gun smoke on the battlefield amidst the Saigo Chong and the different types of gunpowder, and then to look into the gallery and see this, which is a recent acquisition. This is the earliest piece of samurai armor in the rotation, and it's 18th century. Again, it's sort of technical, but it has some aspects to it that make it extremely rare and desirable. One is what we call, it's literally called an acorn-shaped helmet. It's a very hard shape to forge, so it meant that this person was probably a very important, well, this person was, you sort of know who it is, a very important person. This is very cool. You'll notice this little secret compartment on the arm. And it's mirrored on this side by something that does not open, which is actually an arm guard. It's not rare in later suits and other things to see secret compartments, but to see them disguised as actual armor means that this suit was probably used at some point. So it dates to a time of, dates to some point in the 18th century when it maybe was used in battle. This thing on the back inserts into this kind of holster, backpack-like holster, and this is worn when riding a horse. Again, to elevate you even further and kind of signal to a very long procession where the leader is, where the person in charge is. We now have a different mayadate, a different helmet ornament, and I'll show you later, but there are all these little elements when you start looking closely, all these little elements that have this kind of funny 5-spoked water wheel on it. And both of these and aspects of this helmet ornament in particular are crests or kamon, family crests. In Japan, in the Edo period, clans they all had different sigils or symbols that would be emblazoned on flags, on helmets, on dishes, on really anything you can think of that would indicate that they belonged to a certain clan. This suit we know belonged to the Doi clan, and we know this because of this insignia on it, which I'll show you in a moment. But also the Doi, this particular branch of the Doi clan was, this fellow, I believe, was recently installed as a ruler. So in addition to this kind of three-leaf symbol, I'm sorry, I'm so bad with plants, I have no idea what kind of plant this is. But behind it are what we call are symbols of the Tokugawa house, not the imperial house, but the Tokugawa house. So they sort of, from time to time, they would combine kamon or they would make them up to legitimize a ruler. So even just this helmet tells a very, very interesting story. And I believe that this ruler himself was also very interested in naturalism and in botany. So the fact that he probably chose this leaf. But a really, really great, and again, we see this split skirt here. This is a sign that it's modern day armor. It's modern samurai armor, in quotes. Because of course samurai and warriors have an extremely long history in Japan. This is the oldest piece in the exhibition, which dates to, I believe, about the 7th century BC, the Kofun period. We don't really know what these were used for. This is quite an extraordinary one in that it's very, very large. Of course, it was not found in this state. All of these have to be kind of put back together because they would have been found, it would have come from a tomb. And most likely it would have been arranged in a circle with some other warriors for some ritual purpose. Nobody really knows, but they appear in this period and they disappear in this period. However, you will notice a different type of skirt. This is, a good 1,000 years before 2,000 years, before the previous armor that I just showed you, and you notice how much boxier skirt. It's actually not made of those tiny little bits of lacquer that are strung together. It almost looks like it's woven from grass. However, we still have a sword, and we have a helmet, not an acorn-shaped helmet. And it's important, I don't know how important it is actually, but it's interesting to note that the people of this period, of the Yayoi period and prior periods, are actually genetically distinct from the Japanese of today and the Japanese of the Edo period. So this shows that, for reasons of people coming from the continent, from Korea and China, but this shows that even kind of this very, very old native, we might even think of as pre-Japanese or proto-Japanese culture, really valued the warrior class. Later, so this is a 19th century print, but depicting a 12th century event, the Genpei War, a very important battle between two clans. These works will be rotated, so I don't want to emphasize them quite as much, but I did want to include this because it's a great example if somebody asks you, well, what does the older armor look like, or what are some other Mayadate? This gives you examples that show a wide range of helmets, and you can see, as I said, this kind of boxier armor, especially these enlarged shoulder pads, because this print is attempting to depict 1200s. But looking more closely, you can see incredible, very fun, actually, different Mayadate in this print, including a rabbit. And this one is some kind of, you often get like weird combinations of dragons and antlers, depending also on where in Japan the samurai is from. And antlers are very popular for samurai from the north. But you get different kind of shapes of helmets from different angles. And you can really see that these things would have been used in battle, and all of this kind of what looks quite like regalia, which was in fact used as regalia, is actually was for a while meant to be used, because though the Edo period is, we say, a prolonged period of peace, it is not. It's not the only period of Japanese history, and it's also not without its skirmishes. However, in here, this is a historical event, and all this text is indicating. Is describing the scene and then indicating the major, like Taira no Yonejiro, I think, Matsujiro. So they're all indicated, and that's perhaps not as important, but if people ask you what those are. Because in this, you can't sort of zoom in close enough, I guess, to see things like the detail that we can find on the samurai armor. And I apologize again for this lack of focus. I took this photo, and I'm no Annie Leibovitz, but here is the suisha, or the six-spoked water wheel motif. So it is something actually kind of taken from country life. Waterfall comes down and spins the wheel, which turns maybe a mill or something else. Or it could just be in a garden to make a nice noise. Because a lot of samurai culture is actually based around some things about nature. And some kind of religious aspects of nature. We already talked about the Mayadate of this helmet, but you see, if you look closely, you see scrolling, really fine, incised scrolling vines here, and these little kind of, these pointy 5-spoke blossoms with these, I think they're called stamen. Oh man, I should have read a book on plants, I'm sorry. That come here. Cherry blossoms are a very, very important symbol because they renew with the spring. They're kind of an aristocratic notion, but they also, they bloom only very, very briefly. And they're very, very beautiful and very glorious, and they fall, and that's it. But they will come back next year. And sort of this transience of life is something you find throughout Japanese art, but for samurai in particular, you could understand the appeal of coming to terms with the transience of life. I think for everybody in the Edo period, actually, I have to say, everybody in the Edo period carried a knife, and it was mostly to off yourself in case war broke out. It wasn't necessarily for protection. But yes, the tastes of samurai during the Edo period become very, very refined, and in contrast, I would say, to some of their earlier tastes. But they still really, there's actually kind of two competing samurai tastes. One is this sort of tea house, natural refinement, symbols of the transience of life and possible, Shinto symbols. The other is just intimidating and gold. Gold did serve a purpose. It is, of course, very visible, again, amidst gun smoke. But if you find gold in the interiors of, say, a shogun's palace, this is great because it reflects it reflects light, right? And we don't have lanterns, we have candles. So gold did serve a purpose, but it also was a purpose, of intimidation. This is probably the earliest Bamen or earliest samurai horse mask that is known in a public collection. It is also a recent acquisition. It probably dates to, again, based on the style, to this period that's before the Edo period, the Momoyama period, about 1570s. This is the first time Japan is unified. And because of this, it was actually designed to be used and to be worn. As you can imagine, just like children's toys from any period of history, animal armor also tends not to survive in great numbers. It's made to be destroyed. So this is a very, very rare piece. You will see later pieces that are very, very important because they are worn in military processions. And that's something to remember as well, that again, the threat of war or the threat of a skirmish could really break out at any moment. So the daimyo, the leader, the Tokugawa ruler, the shogunate rather, is always trying to figure out ways to keep the peace. And one of the best ways, a very effective way, is a policy, in addition to doling out everyone's allowance, depending on your rank, you would get a different measurement of rice each month, rice being used as a currency essentially. You also essentially had your family taken hostage. It was a requirement that your family that you come with your family to the capital, to Edo, for at least half the year, and then you go back to your province for half the year. But your family would stay behind. So you couldn't rebel. Don't stage a rebellion when your wife and children, right, are at court, which is, it's sort of like Stockholm syndrome friendly hostage situation. But you don't want to do anything to anger the emperor. But as a result, we have parades, right, parades of samurai up and down Japan twice a year. So things like horse armor become important, less for actual fighting and more for decoration. And so many of those survive, but an early one like this, and those are made of very heavy lacquer, and they just look more solid. So that kind of explains the condition of this. If you could ask, why are some of its gorgeous lashes missing? But when you look closely, you'll see there are holes for breathing, holes for the horse to see, and even on the side there would be holes where other panels would be laced to cover the horse's sides. When we X-rayed it, which is quite interesting, we found that there are, in addition to it's made of deer lacquer and probably animal glue, which is also derived from deer. It has sort of silvery teeth and black lacquer eyes, and obviously gold. But in addition, we found that it was stabilized on the inside with some very handmade iron, probably iron spikes, and we don't know what these are. We have no clue what these little circles in the horn are, or when they could have been added. Because it could have been, things like this would have been routinely repaired, say if the horn broke off. So that's a fun guessing game. As I said, cherry blossom is very important, and this kind of notion of refinement. This is by Ninami Dohachi. It's currently on view. It's really a marvel of Japanese manipulation of clay. It's very hard to see in this photo, but it's actually pierced, so you would sort of see through it. And this would have been, maybe most likely one of a set of 5. Maybe it would have been served as one course of a multi-course kaiseki or feast at a samurai's, definitely during the springtime, because it's spring motif, cherry blossoms. Again, with the 5 little, they're kind of pinkish. They're much more pink than they look in this photo. And the kind of like 5 little petals, that's the word. But it's a pierced bowl, but you often find this in very fancy, especially foods that would be served at a kaiseki. They're very, very deep. And that's because sometimes you don't want to see, or one doesn't, per sort of Japanese Emily Post, one doesn't want to see the food from the side. Either because in some cases of like pickles, it's just unattractive, even though it's tasty. But in this case, likely because you're meant to kind of peer down into this bowl, because the scene does continue onto the inside. So this kind of gives you a sense of how this aspect of the transience of everyday life really, it permeated everyday life for the shogun, both in a very real sense, the threat of death or the threat of someone dying, but also in their decorative goods. But what did they wear just around the house? I showed you guys the kind of fancy wear. So this is a more typical thing, and this is in the museum's collection. It's a photograph by Ueno Hikoma, one of the great studio photographers of 19th century Japan. You can see it was taken in the studio. You can see that he has a crest. Just as I said, he would be identified, his clan would be identified by this crest. These are some these very interesting kind of wide baggy pants that some forms of them can be cinched up for battle, but they're kind of this way they facilitate riding a horse. And 2 swords. This is indicative of samurai status, 2 swords. Regular people were not allowed to carry 2 swords. And I should say we don't have a sword on view. Swords are very expensive and very hard to come by. As I said earlier, everyone had a sword and families had swords. And the sword was a very important symbolic thing, often handed down over generations. And some of the most famous ones are given names. The swords themselves have names. But really, they're very hard to acquire these days because they are literally the very last thing you'll sell. Like it's the most shameful thing to have to sell your family's samurai sword. Nowadays, that's very symbolic. But in the Edo period, not only is this symbolic, but you don't sell the sword because that's what you need to protect yourself. Like don't sell the sword. Everything else first. And so that's where that belief comes in. Another thing about these pants is they don't have pockets, right? So gentlemen in the Edo period would wear things called sagemono, which are hanging things, specifically inro in this case. This is on display in the gallery next to the samurai. A very common motif, these fish. It's done in lacquer and inlaid with abalone. It's really worth seeing in person because you have to kind of, originally when this thing would have been worn and clipped onto a belt with a netsuke, it would have moved and dangled. It's decorated on both sides, and you would really be able to. This guy, this spiny shrimp, the ise ebi, would be really, really visible. And when you look closely at it, you'll see that the Kajikawa school artists who made it even chose kind of the orientation of the coloring of the shells to kind of simulate the little spiny guy even better. It's split into 5 parts. You kind of can't see here, but there's a line. So the design is further divided. It's done so amazingly you can't even really see it, but it would come apart and have 5 little cases for you to put important things, say a snuff or a personal seal or something in this case. But it was also meant to be admired. It's kind of like an Hermes bag, I suppose you might say, but for men in Edo period Japan. Why fish? Why? And they aren't swimming. Sorry to tell you. If we were to look on the back, you'd see a couple of them are upside down, I think. This kind of, the fish splayed out at a fish market or fish maybe even splayed out on a beach. This could be sand, this kind of gold lacquer, is a very common theme in Japanese art. It's known as umi no sachi, or the bounty of the sea. It's also, in a sense, kind of a dualistic thing like a cherry blossom. It's a beautiful and bountiful event, but in Japanese Buddhism, one of the very first signs of the apocalypse is the drying up of fish. You will see, now I've been talking about the modern armor, and as I said, we do have notions of the Edo period as one of peace, and this is especially after the Edo period, this is very, very true. The samurai are a class of people that are given money in the form of rice, but vast amounts of rice, which they use to feed their troops and everything, but they largely aren't needed in battle as much anymore. So when do you need, as I said, when do you need samurai armor, especially in the 19th century, the later 19th century? For the most part, you need it just for those processions back and forth to the capital or some kind of symbolic purpose. And so 19th century, later samurai armor tends to get very exuberant, very decorative, we might say, and it revives earlier styles, including these very boxy shoulder pads. And then these things, there are toggles on the other samurai armor linos, but these are so elongated and just needless. And then why would you, of course, if you're about to throw fists at somebody, you're about to get into a battle, you don't want this very finely decorated butterfly gold lacquer motif of the arm guards. So, comparing even the arm guards from this one, which are completely non-functional, to the one before, which may have even, some people think had, some kind of herb to kind of sedate yourself. If you were getting too terrified. It's really use versus decoration. This is from The samurai armor, yes, the samurai armor that you walk in, and I wanted to put this just as a detail in case anyone is interested. If you look closely at areas of this samurai armor, I should have taken a photo, I'm sorry, but you see this motif here very frequently in Japanese textiles. It doesn't always look like this though. This little cross should actually be 4 separate petals, and it should look like an iris sprouting from a mound of grass, as it does on this suit. Here, however, I think it's very obvious to a Western audience that this is now meant to resemble a crucifix or kind of a mini little Golgotha, especially with them arranged in 3 like this. Christianity, of course, illegal, prohibited in Japan, beginning in 1603. But there were, of course, Portuguese who had arrived before that and gotten some converts before that, especially in southern Japan, which is closer to the continent. And so there is this, it's called literally hidden Christianity, kakure kushitan. I hate, kurishitankyo, I hate saying that, it's very difficult. But as it was illegal, you would sometimes have hidden icons to the Virgin Mary, disguised as Guan Yin, or the Queen Mother of the West, or very often on samurai armor, this kind of hidden cross, so that you could plausibly say, no, it's a poorly printed iris, but you yourself would know it was providing you with some kind of talismanic protection. So it's very, very interesting when you look very closely at samurai armor, some of the details that they reveal. But you'll see that from time to time on samurai armor. On this piece, another religious symbol is the mayadate. In this case, it's hard to tell in my photo, but it's what we call a vajra, which is a kind of Buddhist ritual implement. And as I said, Buddhism plays an important role in samurai culture, especially these kind of, as you can imagine, if you're a samurai, the notion of a wrathful deity, which is something that we have in certain branches of Buddhism, would appeal to you. And so there is influence coming from India, coming from Tibet, coming from somewhat from Southeast Asia, but principally India, Tibet, and China, where you do get this bits of kind of ritual Buddhist Vajrayana, literally Tantric practice. That's what I was looking for, Tantric practice. Very similar to our Havajra statue. This is a very important piece. This is probably one of the Asia collection's most important pieces. It's very, very rare to have a dated Nepalese piece, especially one this early, 1531. The inscription is here on the base. They are standing on top of a lotus. Depending on the age of your group, you might want, how you want to address the position, the yabyum, or the sacred union of student and teacher. It is very, very sexualized, but this is kind of part of ritual practice. But if you look closely, Havajra, bearing the Vajra, is seen. I believe that's the Vajra that he's holding. I can't remember. And I shouldn't even say he, because they're kind of sort of genderless, but that's the notion. So there are actual connections. I mean, indeed, gods from Hinduism, and I hope to talk about this we have to do another one of these that's principally about Hinduism, but Hindu gods even make their way to Japan, where they get really cute and nice, actually. Shiva the Destroyer becomes like a very sweet household god, but his origins are the same. I've talked a lot about men in shogun culture, and now I want to talk a little bit about women, because a big part of shogunal culture and culture during the Edo period was women and female culture and female beauty. But women were also very important for securing strategic alliances. Strategic marriages were very, very common. It's very similar to medieval Europe. But one of the things that's actually, I didn't plan this, but very dissimilar from medieval Europe is that you would be expected to bathe a lot. So one of the things you would get as part of an arranged marriage, the bride would come with a vast, vast dowry, including a huge trousseau of custom-made objects, clothes, painted scrolls, printed books, jewels, and of course, always a personal, again, very vast, this is only a very small sliver of the toiletry set that a lady would need. This is lacking many things to get you ready for a night out on the town in Edo, but it's still a lot. It's still a lot. And so I'll explain what some of the things are. This to the right here is called an uchikake, or to your right is an uchikake, a wedding kimono. It's not worn belted, so this is why it's kind of displayed like this. The hem at the bottom is padded, and this would drag behind the bride, who would have several white layers on beneath it. It would drag behind her during a wedding. And it's covered with gold, and it has a pine motif, and these little folded things. They're not actually folded, they're embroidered, but they're meant to be these kind of specially folded, decorated envelopes that you would, at festive occasions, but especially weddings, use to convey, to give money or give gifts. So this is very auspicious. If you look closely when in the gallery, the bottom looks dusty. It's not dust. It's actually, the bottom has been sprinkled with gold. So this, like the inro, is something that was really designed to be in motion. But in order to get ready for that day, here's what you have to do. So this is a mirror case, and we have mirror stands. This is very important because you can't touch the mirror. The mirror is made of bronze. And if you touch it, it will tarnish, and then it will become non-functional. So you need lots of cases and stands because you can't sit there holding the mirror. Some you can if you have like sometimes you see pieces of paper or a bit of silk, but if you're a real, you need someplace to store it as well so it doesn't tarnish, because again, it's not a modern mirror like we have today. Although I'm sure they called it a modern mirror just because it's the Edo period. You have combs of different fineness. You would start with, after you wash your hair, you would start with the wide tooth and you work your way down. Makeup, of course, makeup application. To be done after, probably would have been kept in here. The thing you would, if you were a really fancy lady, you would shave your eyebrows with a terrifyingly long razor, actually, to be putting it, as someone who occasionally shaves. I wouldn't put anything that large near my face. Lots of different kind of containers for different sorts of, red for your lips, white for your face and neck. Brushes to apply it probably would have been stored in here. This would have been used for someone to bring you hot water to wash your hair with. We do actually in this set, it's not on view because it's so big. We have the basin that a lady would use to wash her hair. And it's decorated with a similar motif. And then we have this, which is very strange and exciting. You'll notice that it's decorated with imperial Tokugawa ginkgo crests, the ginkgo leaf, done in 3 different metals. It's got pine and bamboo, so a very auspicious theme, but also probably pine and bamboo are often associated with New Year or with winter, so it could have been perhaps a wintertime wedding. But what is all this? This is the tooth blackening kit. So again, you don't have a mirror and you don't have toothpaste. So one of the ways you could guard against your teeth falling out was to do this ritual every day where you would literally fill this with a kind of mixture of vinegar and ground iron oxide, ground rust, a sort of rust. And you would, standing over this bowl, which has little holes so your spittle and other things can drain, you would put some of it in here, and using kind of a wire brush, essentially, you would brush your teeth with this mixture every day until they became black and shiny and essentially lacquered. Which is important because you'll see, that reaction was literally why in 1872 the emperor said we have to stop doing this. It was literally because it freaks foreign people out. That's what he said. But it's better than losing your teeth. But you will see when you look closely at some Japanese prints of beautiful women, these are all from, again, Beautiful Women of the Modern Day is the title of, I think, one of these series. You'll sometimes see that. That's not a printing error. That's not a shadow. She's got black teeth. It's not from smoking either. She's got black teeth on purpose because, again, it's better than having your teeth fall out. She does too, actually. All these ladies should, because these are all, you can tell from, well, these two you can tell from what they're wearing, that they are beauties or women, probably women of the pleasure quarter, definitely women of the pleasure quarter. One of the very interesting things about this going back and forth to the capital that I mentioned is that the family stays in the capital, but the samurai travel with all of their soldiers. So at any given point, there is an influx of a whole bunch, thousands of single men into Edo, into the capital. So where do they go? They go to the pleasure district. But I want to say, and I'll move on there in a second, but I want to say, so in Japan, when you see, in Japanese art rather, not in Japan, in Japanese art, when you see a lady washing her hair, it's really, this is like, she's had a crazy night out. This is really late. This is probably like 4 or 5 in the morning. The clients have gone home, and she's washing this incredible mess out of her hair. You wouldn't wash your hair every day. You would actually have this done, and it's pretty firm in place. Sometimes there are wig elements too, but a real courtesan would have it really kind of lacquered in place, and you would essentially sleep on I don't even know what it looks like. It's it almost looks like a little post or like a little pedestal you might display like a pocket watch or something on, but it just sits on the back of your neck and you lie there so you don't mess up your hair. So this is kind of a rare sight, and it's associated, with the only women you would see washing their hair essentially are women in the pleasure quarter the morning after. Maybe you're going to work and you see someone out there doing that. And Utamaro, this artist, likes to slip in casual nudity because these are also meant to be very sexy prints. But you'll see all of the hair ornaments, sometimes the combs even go into the hair. They're not just used for combing. Pins, there would have been lots and lots of these pins in the boxes. And look, we have crests. But crests are not always associated with the imperial family or with warlords. Sometimes they're associated with businesses, with actors, with pleasure houses. But they were, up until the 1870s, highly regimented. These are all from the 1790s. But if you were to go out in Edo as one of those men at night, perhaps in the pleasure quarter, these are the sort of ladies you might see. I will say that these appear to be quite respectable because their obis are tied in the back. If your obi is tied in the back, the obi is the sash used to tie a kimono. Only courtesans, only women of the night tie their obis in the front, okay? So if it's tied in the back, despite these ladies are just like out having a cherry blossom viewing at night. But you can see, just like the kimono I showed you, lavish patterns, and in this case, a really interesting use of light to indicate, that they're out at night in the capital. They probably are meant to be women of the pleasure quarter because they're women out at night and they're done up, but they aren't directly implicated, let's say, as women of the night in this print. But I wanted to do a close-up in case anyone asks you about some of these symbols that we see on Japanese prints, which are endlessly detailed, down to even like her curling toes and these very high geta. This is a very fine impression. If we look closely, you can see the wood grain actually in the print. That means it was printed very early in the edition. And then Japanese prints are covered with so much text. People always ask me, what are all these texts? What are all these symbols? And it's important to remember about Japanese prints. It is not really, I'm about to give a lecture in a week of calling it an art form, so don't tell anyone I said this, but it is not really an art form as much as it is an industry at the time. It is all about making money. It does emerge as one of the world's greatest art forms, but it's all about making money. So we have things like a publisher's seal. We have a censorship guild because these were very, very popular, but you couldn't criticize the emperor. You couldn't have anything too pornographic. But again, this only needs to go on a print you're going to sell publicly. If you want to privately commission a pornographic print, you're fine. We have an artist's seal, an artist's name, and this is a series. And often you have a series and a title because you would sometimes even try to sell these like on a subscription model. So a lot of and sometimes I'll tell you the series titles don't bear out, right? We have titles that say 50 views of such and such, and it only has 13 images because by number 13, they realized they weren't selling, so they canceled the series. Or we have 50 views and there were actually 85 designs because it was selling, so they just kept printing it. Or kept making new designs. So all of these symbols are really telling you about the bustling life of Edo. And here we have a picture of it from the late 19th century. This is after the Edo period. You can sort of tell there's a modern bridge, I believe, here in the background. But after the Edo period, so it doesn't have the same, it has the artist's name and seal, but you notice none of the same censorship marks, none of the same publishing marks. But this gives you a sense for, I like this print because not only is it on view, but it gives you a sense for all of the different social classes in Edo at the time and how they mixed, how there were samurai, look, samurai, on the bridge at the same time as very fancy ladies. I don't think it's tied in the front here, I can't tell. But I think she's actually meant to be probably a courtesan because she has a little trainee with her. We have someone here carrying a portable Shinto shrine in case you want to just quickly get some blessings and offer him some alms. He's carrying a sagemono, right? He doesn't have pockets, as I said. This is a monkey trainer. Anytime you see this staff, this is like the classic, the monkey will go sit on top of here so you can call people over to make your money. We have, I can't remember what these people are called. I think it's Betto. and they are one of the most common sights that, like the Black Teeth, shocked foreigners actually in the 19th century, of these semi-naked men who push things around, and we have two maybe merchants or kind of farmer-type men, all meeting here on a street in the Capitol, along with a little stray dog, in the Capitol. And this is a very much an accurate depiction of life at the time, down to even kind of these the very packed, crowded houses. If you come to my lecture here on the 13th, I'll talk about how, because of the things I've just told you and the social conditions of Edo, I do believe these are really the world's first form of modern art in the sense that we talk about it, but they are ultimately a commercial enterprise. You'll notice, though, one of the things these later prints have is this very beautiful kind of soft shading that is here used to simulate the light, but is here used to simulate volume. And this is, of course, the influence of Western photography, because this is the late 19th century. In the late 19th century Japan, as I said, we have a thriving and bustling capital, and we have a bustling print industry, actually, and we have lots of other great industries. But one of the things that happens in the 1870s, I believe, I think it's 1878, is that the samurai are abolished as, 1872, abolished as an official caste. They no longer receive their privy purse. They no longer receive rice. So some of them are very educated, very wealthy, and they pivot to other industries, and they actually go on to found some of the companies like Mitsubishi that we have today. But, you know, and they do so, I will say, they do so wearing foreign suits, right? They do so wearing Western suits. So what do you do if you're an armor maker? What do you do if you're a sword maker? What do you do if those are the ways that you make your living? Because for, you know, a good 1,200 years, that was a pretty good job, pretty reliable source of income. Well, you have all these skills that then you can use to make marvelous art objects that now the government will pay you to make, and rich industrialists will buy to show not only their reverence for Japanese culture, but the marvels of Japanese industry. So this dates to 1898. You'll see it is decorated with samurai crests, which are basically decorative at this point. They don't really have a symbolic meaning in here, but we do have, again, we have the Doi clan here, that same water wheel motif, and it's extended. These are the chrysanthemums on the end, and that is the symbol of the emperor. It's kind of used, we actually have to count, make sure it has 17 petals, because you're really not supposed to just willy-nilly use the symbol of the emperor, but you can use a 16-petaled one. So we should check. But when you start looking, these are fun things to have people try to identify, because they're, you know, different flowers. This one is the Iwasaki crest, which ultimately becomes the Mitsubishi logo, funnily enough. But the real star is this hawk by Aoki Tomonobu, which is dated to 1898. I wish that we could see it here up close without even any glass in between, as it was meant to be seen, because it is really an extraordinary example of how these Japanese metal workers use some of the techniques they were previously using on armor to make a beautiful, beautiful decorative object that is absolutely, looks as though it's about to spring to life. Falconry has a long and storied history in Japan. It's one of the things that connects Japan with Mongolia and India and ultimately Iran. It's actually, true fact, falcons are the only animals you're allowed to bring on Emirati Airways. I found this out in doing research on falcons. True fact. So this is a hawk. I think it's a kestrel, I believe, and he is very interesting. It's kind of a new sort of thing in the 19th century to show a hawk about to fly off, a falcon rather, kind of like this, about to fly off. Normally they are posed with a jess and very as a symbol of the samurai, because they were the only ones allowed to participate in falconry, as a kind of very reserved bird. You find a lot of eagles, and eagles are often making crazy faces. Eagles are kind of a bit wilder. There's a phrase in Japanese, the eagle never looks up, which means you don't want to be called that. It means you're very excited, but you don't, you know, the eagle, you can get the eagle from above because he doesn't know really what's going on. But this is based on a very famous group of 12 hawks that were exhibited in Paris and in Chicago in 1893, and by Suzuki Chokichi, probably the foremost Japanese metalworker of his time. And if we look closely, you'll see, again, we have to see this in person, but all of these different patinations are things that have their basis in armor making. And Japanese patinated metals, as long as you don't touch them, they won't rust. So the way this bird would have been made is it was cast And then when you go look closely, you'll see there's gold, and there's shakudo, which is another kind of metal, and shibuichi, which is another kind of metal. Shibuichi, they're all copper alloys. Shibuichi literally means 4 in 1. It's like 4 parts copper, 1 part iron or something. But when you mix them and you boil them, then you boil this piece after you've cast it in a kind of hydrochloric acid solution, sometimes for a day or two. They take on this glorious patination that looks almost black, and it enables you to do various shades of gray. It enables you to do this incredible, effectively shading on this hawk as though it's almost painted. And when you see it in person, you'll see that even the casting is so unreal. Even the little like, you can almost see his pores, basically, those little like scaly things. But this is shown probably as it would have been displayed, and it's an incense burner. And incense burners are often the thing that Japanese artists lavish the most attention on. Every time I show them, I say they're like the good china. You spend the most on them, but then you probably don't ever use it. You have an actual incense burner that you burn incense in. But it is a great way, I think, to think about connecting the galleries, and I hope that I can come back and give you another talk approaching the other side, maybe coming from India. But thinking about incense, it's one of the things they do share across the galleries. And you'll see, as we have it on display in the Japanese gallery, it's with this little rabbit. It's not displayed like this, but the rabbit, this is the lid for this bunny, which is also an incense burner. Rabbits have a very long association in Japan with the moon. We see a man in the moon. Japanese people see a rabbit making rice paste. So, which is very cute, actually. It's very cute. And they also often look like this. They have little claws and these kind of red eyes. This is a very canonical depiction of a rabbit. But as Beatrice's label points out, this Buddhist jewel kind of is another nod kind of to Buddhism in Japanese culture, but not necessarily ritual practice. I don't think this would necessarily be used at a sacred, it would be really inappropriate to show up to like a sort of a sacred Buddhist ceremony with this. But something with the New Year or the Lunar New Year would be really excellent. They're also often shown in Japanese art with eagles catching them. So one of the things you would have hunted with a hawk. But as I said, the hawk is also an incense burner. And when you look closely at it, see these raised feathers? Those form a little, here they are, they form a little handle for you to lift this thing off the back. And inside is where it's dated and signed. And it was likely never used. There's like a little kind of silver insertion lining about that big that goes in there that you would put incense in. But I can't imagine it was ever used, because also it's, the ones that were used are often kind of make sense, like smoke coming out of a dragon's mouth. I think the spontaneous combustion of a falcon is really quite like an off-putting, like why is the falcon just smoking? But I think, and it also would have messed up the patination. If you were going to spend as much as this would have cost in the late 19th century, you would have wanted just to display it, not really for ritual use. But we do have wonderful other incense burners in the other galleries that we're using, including one of our most important Chinese pieces. And Beatrice and I are working feverishly with new acquisitions and new arrangements in the galleries to try and, especially our Indian gallery, to try and make them a little more user-friendly and a little more tour-friendly. So with these next few slides, I'm showing you kind of a preview of some objects that we've just acquired that we'll be putting out, and ways that you might be able to integrate them into kind of thematic tours. Because we've talked a lot about animals and incense. And currently on view is our marvelous ding. And if you look closely at it, it is actually covered with animals, but one of the kind of most prominent are these. It sort of looks like my dog, actually. It sort of looks like a Boston Terrier, but it's actually kind of a mythical animal, an auspicious animal, and it's being used here as a foot. And so it's fun. One of the ways to approach ancient art, even if you don't want to delve into all the symbolism and history, is to understand how these cultures are related based on simple things, just like the presence of incense and the use of animal motifs. In terms of an animal motif, and this is another cast bronze. This is a very early cast bronze, but if you want to talk about metal casting, this related to the hawk is truly excellent. We have just acquired, I'm proud to say, our very first Vietnamese, historical Vietnamese piece, which is a wonderful imperial Nguyen Dynasty cannon. It's dated 1855. But it too has things in common with Confucian motifs, Taoist motifs, and even the form of that ding that I just showed you. Here we have a dragon, which is up here on the lid, this kind of snarling dragon. And this looks like a yin-yang, but it's actually two fish. which is a very Vietnamese thing. These two fish swimming together make a yin-yang. And it's covered with mythical animals the whole way down, and it's dated and everything. It was used in or I don't know if it was used, but it was commissioned for I'm trying to think of a PC word. It was to ward off, to fight, it was used to fight against the French in the Cochin China campaign, which was kind of the first real, was used ineffectively, that's what I should say, against the French. But it's one of very few known examples, and it even has a royal inventory mark. So this one as well is something that in the gallery really, I wish I had more photos of all the animals, because it really tells a story. There are deer and more fish and all kinds of even Buddhist ritual objects like a vajra and other things. Oh, so almost done. These we also just acquired. I really want to come back and talk more about our Indian pieces, but this is a great 19th century Udaipur shield. This is a beautiful 18th century Chinese sculpture, which we're conserving right now. Very, very rare. And it's a tiger. It's a Tibetan goddess made in China, but it has kind of resonances of Durga and of Hindu based on. And then this finally is a piece we also just bought at our last dinner, which is from 1934. It's a Japanese screen, really, really beautiful. And it relates because it's a beautiful depiction of an animal, but it's also the Japanese sort of classic military dog. So it even, in a way, kind of relates to some of samurai culture. I hope that, I'm sorry that I went a little over on time, but, and I only really did Japan, so imagine if we had to do all of Asia. So next time I will come back, and I hope that we can do India and Southeast Asia. But I would love to join you in the galleries briefly and answer any questions you might have in front of pieces.